They tried to take 6 feet of my land. Just 6 feet. Like it was nothing. Like I wouldn't notice. Like I wouldn't care. And by the time it was over, they were tearing down a $500,000 build piece by piece while I stood there watching. The crazy part is, it didn't start as some big dramatic feud. It started quiet, polite even, the kind of polite that makes you uneasy if you've lived long enough to recognize it. I live on about 8 acres just outside a small town most people wouldn't even recognize on a map, the kind of place where folks wave when they drive past you, where property lines aren't just legal boundaries, they're personal, they're history. My land runs along a creek, nothing fancy but it's peaceful, and along the north edge there's this natural limestone ridge, uneven and worn, like it's been sitting there longer than any of us, which it probably has. That ridge has always been the boundary, not just by memory, but by survey, by law, by every official record that matters. When I bought the place back in 2011, I had it surveyed, properly, licensed surveyor, county records, GPS coordinates, iron pins driven straight into the rock with bright orange caps, the kind you can spot even if you're not looking for them. I walked that line myself more times than I can count, sometimes just out of habit, sometimes because it felt grounding. Knowing exactly where something begins and ends has a way of settling your mind. For years, nothing changed, same trees, same creek, same quiet, until the land uphill from me sold. Now that parcel had been sitting untouched for decades, overgrown, a little wild, the way I liked it. Then one day I see heavy equipment rolling in, trucks, trailers, crews clearing trees like they were racing against a deadline no one else knew about. Within a week, it was unrecognizable, and within a month there were foundation forms laid out like someone was planning to drop a mansion right on top of the hill. That's when I first met Daniel Mercer. He came down one afternoon, clean boots somehow, which already told me something. Wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Watch catching the light just enough to make sure you noticed it. The kind of guy who smiles with his mouth, but not his eyes. He introduced himself like we were neighbors in a brochure, not strangers about to share a boundary line. "Hey there," he said, easy tone, casual. "I'm overseeing the build up there. Just wanted to check in. Make sure we're all good on drainage, runoff, that sort of thing." I nodded, kept it simple. Water flows down the east side mostly, creek handles the rest. He looked around, scanning more than listening. Then he asked the question that didn't feel like a question. "You ever had your land surveyed?" I remember pausing just a second, not long, but enough. "Yeah, when I bought it. Markers are still in place." He gave this little approving nod, like I'd passed some kind of test. "Good. That makes things easier. We'll make sure we stay clear." And that was it. Or at least that's how it looked. Construction picked up fast after that. Crews working weekends, lights on past sunset, the kind of pace that tells you money's involved, serious money. I'd hear the hammering echo down the hill, see delivery trucks coming and going, and I won't lie. Part of me wondered what kind of place they were building up there. Big, probably beautiful, not really my business. Until it became my business. It was about 2 months in. I was walking the boundary like I sometimes do, just checking things out. No real reason. And something felt off before I even knew what I was looking at, like when a room's been rearranged and you can't immediately say how, but you know it's different. Then I saw it. The orange cap's gone. At first I thought maybe they'd been knocked loose. Construction gets messy, things shift. But then I spotted new stakes, clean-cut wood, painted blue, lined up neat and deliberate, and they weren't where they were supposed to be. They were inside my land. Not by inches, by feet. I pulled out my phone, opened the GPS file I still had saved, the coordinates from my original survey. I stood there checking, double-checking, walking back and forth between points, trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, even as my gut was already telling me what I didn't want to admit. 6 feet. They had moved the line 6 feet onto my property. I kept walking, slower now, more focused, and that's when I saw what those 6 feet were for. A concrete patio poured clean and wide, stretching right past where the limestone ridge marked the true boundary. Posts already set for a pergola, framing going up, electrical trenches cut into the ground for lighting. All of it sitting comfortably, confidently on my land. I just stood there for a minute, not angry yet, not even fully processing it, just trying to understand how someone makes that kind of decision and thinks it's going to hold. Then I started taking pictures, everything, the new stakes, the patio, the construction, and eventually I found them. The original markers, my markers, shoved off to the side into the brush like they were trash someone didn't feel like hauling away. That's when the anger showed up. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. I pulled out my phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, relaxed, like we were still in that first conversation. Hey, how's it going? I didn't match his tone. Your stakes are on my land. There was a pause, just long enough to notice. What do you mean, he said. I mean they're 6 feet past the boundary. And your patio's on my property. Another pause, shorter this time. Well, he said, voice shifting just slightly. We had our surveyor come out and re-establish the line. Looks like the old markers weren't accurate. I actually let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how easily he said it. They've been accurate for over a decade, I said. They're on file with the county. Our survey is more recent, he replied. And I could hear the confidence creeping in now, like he thought this was already settled. And right there, that's when something clicked for me. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped arguing. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding, and it definitely wasn't an accident. It was a decision. And if that's how they wanted to play it, then I was done talking. I didn't call him back after that, didn't send a follow-up, didn't argue, didn't even step foot near their construction line for a couple days. Which, if you know me, is not my style. But I've learned over time that the louder someone gets, the more they're usually trying to cover something up, and Daniel, he wasn't loud, he was smooth, confident, almost rehearsed, and that made it worse. So instead of reacting, I shifted gears. The next morning, I called someone I trusted, not a friend exactly, but one of those guys whose name gets passed around quietly when things matter. His name was Carl Whitaker, licensed surveyor, been working that county longer than most of the roads had pavement. My neighbor down the road had used him years ago and told me one thing that stuck. Said, Carl doesn't guess, and he doesn't get intimidated. He showed up the very next day in a faded pickup truck that looked like it had seen every kind of weather imaginable, stepped out with a GPS unit, a stack of worn documents, and that calm, almost bored expression of someone who already expects the truth to be exactly what it is, no surprises. No small talk either, just a nod and, show me. We walked the ridge together, me pointing out where the original markers had been, where I found them tossed aside. He crouched down, brushed dirt away from the limestone like he was uncovering something buried on purpose, and within maybe 20 minutes, he found the first iron pin, exactly where it should have been. Orange cap still attached, scuffed but intact. He didn't say anything at first, just marked it, checked his device, scribbled something on a pad. Then he found the next one, and the next. Every single original marker, still there, still aligned, still matching the coordinates down to the inch. After that, he walked over to the blue stakes Apex had put in, took a reading, checked his numbers again, then looked at me for the first time with something slightly more animated than indifference. 6 feet, he said. I nodded. Yeah. He exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh. That's not drift. That's not error. That's placement. And there it was, confirmation, plain and simple. No gray area, no interpretation. He spent the next few hours documenting everything, taking measurements, photos, logging coordinates, the kind of thorough work that doesn't leave room for arguments later. At one point, he even walked up toward the construction area, stood there watching the crew for a minute, then turned back without saying a word, like he'd already seen enough. Before he left, he handed me a preliminary summary and said, I'll have the full report done tonight. But you're right, and they know you're right. That last part stuck with me more than anything else. Not that they were wrong, but that they knew. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was stressed, but because my brain kept replaying that conversation with Daniel, the way he laughed, the way he leaned on more recent survey, like it was some kind of trump card, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just convenience, it was calculation. 6 feet doesn't sound like much until you realize what it buys you: more space for design, better alignment for a patio, maybe even a better view angle, small shift, big payoff. As long as nobody pushes back. The next morning, Carl emailed me the full report, stamped, signed, detailed in a way that made it almost impossible to argue against. Coordinates, historical references, photographic evidence, everything tied back to county records. It wasn't just solid, it was airtight. I didn't hesitate after that. I called an attorney. Her name was Laura Bennett, sharp, direct, no wasted words. And after reading through Carl's report once, just once, she leaned back in her chair and said something that shifted the entire weight of the situation. "They didn't just cross your property line," she said. "They moved legal markers to do it." I frowned slightly. "So?" She held my gaze. "That's not a civil issue, that's criminal." I'll admit, that caught me off guard. Up until that point, I was thinking in terms of boundaries, disputes, maybe fines, inconvenience. But this was something else entirely. Laura didn't over-explain, didn't dramatize it either, just laid it out clean. If they knowingly displaced survey markers and replaced them to support a false boundary, that's fraud. And depending on how it's documented, it can cost someone their license or more. I sat there for a second, letting that settle. "And the structures?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Encroachment, which means if we prove it, they don't get to keep any of it." That's when I felt it. Not satisfaction, not yet, but momentum. We filed that same day. Not just a complaint, a full suit. Property encroachment, fraudulent survey activity, and she also pushed to have the case flagged for review by the state licensing board. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about drawing a line, clearly, legally, permanently. Daniel called me 2 days later. Different tone this time. Still controlled, but tighter. "Hey," he said, "I heard you brought in a surveyor." "Yeah," I said simply. Another pause. "Look, these things happen. Lines get interpreted differently sometimes." "No," I said. "They don't." Silence. Then a small shift, like he was recalibrating. "Maybe we should sit down, figure this out before it turns into something bigger than it needs to be." I almost smiled at that, not because it was clever, but because it was predictable. "It already is," I said. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, everything went through lawyers, filings, responses, motions, the kind of slow-moving process that tests your patience if you're not used to it. But here's the thing. When your foundation is solid, you don't need to rush. And mine was. A few weeks in, the court ordered an independent survey. Not mine, not theirs, county-appointed. And that's when the pressure shifted completely. Because now it wasn't about competing claims anymore. It was about the truth showing up officially. The county surveyor showed up about 10 days later. No announcement, no build-up, just a white truck pulling up mid-morning while the construction crew was already working, compressors humming, nail guns popping in the background like nothing in the world was about to change for them. I was down by the creek when I saw him, clipboard in hand, GPS unit slung over his shoulder, the kind of quiet presence that doesn't ask for attention but commands it anyway. I walked up slowly, gave him a nod, introduced myself. He already knew who I was. "Just here to verify," he said, calm, neutral, no opinions, no sides. Daniel wasn't there yet, but he showed up not long after, pulling in a little faster than necessary, stepping out with that same polished look, but something underneath it had shifted. The confidence was still there, but it wasn't effortless anymore. It was being held together. We didn't talk. Nobody did, really. The surveyor got to work, moving methodically along the ridge, checking coordinates, locating the original pins one by one. Same process Carl had followed, same results unfolding in real time. I watched Daniel out of the corner of my eye as each marker was confirmed. You could see it happening, piece by piece, like a structure in his head slowly losing support. Then came the blue stakes. The surveyor measured, paused, checked again, then wrote something down without expression. He didn't need to say it. Everyone there already knew. Still, he finished the job, documented everything, took photos, logged coordinates, and before he left, he gave a simple statement that landed heavier than anything else said that day. Original boundary stands. That was it. No drama, no emphasis, just final. After that, things moved faster. The court hearing wasn't some long, drawn-out spectacle like you see on TV. It was precise, almost clinical. Evidence presented, reports compared, timelines established. Carl's findings, the county's confirmation, the displaced markers, the construction overlap, all laid out clean, undeniable. Daniel's side tried. I'll give them that. They argued updated surveys, margin of error, misinterpretation, but it didn't hold. Not against physical markers embedded in stone, not against documented coordinates, not against two independent surveys saying the exact same thing. At one point, the judge actually leaned forward slightly and asked a question that cut through all of it. Were the original markers moved? There was a pause, just a fraction too long. And that silence said everything. The ruling came down the same day. Clear, direct, no room for negotiation. All structures encroaching on my property were to be removed within 30 days, fully removed, not adjusted, not modified, gone. Patio, pergola, electrical, everything that crossed that line. I didn't react right away, didn't smile, didn't look over at Daniel. I just sat there, letting it settle in a way that felt quiet. Not victory exactly, more like balance being restored. Outside the courthouse, Daniel approached me one last time. No sunglasses this time. No performance. "Look," he said, voice lower, more real than I'd heard it before. "This doesn't have to end like this. 6 feet, we can buy it from you. Name your price." I studied him for a second, really looked this time. And I realized something. For him, this was still a transaction. A problem to solve with numbers, a situation to smooth over. But for me, it wasn't about 6 feet. It was about the fact that he thought it was. "No," I said. He blinked, just once. "You're willing to let all of this get torn apart, over a strip of land you don't even use?" I shook my head slightly. "It's not unused. It's mine." And that was the end of it. The teardown started about a week later. And I'll be honest, I showed up for it. Not every day, not all day, but enough. Enough to hear the jackhammer break through that smooth concrete they'd poured so confidently. Enough to watch workers dismantle the pergola piece by piece, pulling out beams that had never even seen a full season. Enough to see trenches reopened, wiring ripped out, the ground turned back into something raw and uneven. There was no music, no dramatic speeches, just machinery, dust, and the sound of something expensive being undone. At one point, one of the workers glanced over at me, not hostile, not friendly, just curious, like he was trying to understand how something like this even happens. I almost said something, almost explained, but I didn't, because the truth is, this kind of thing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small decisions. A question asked casually. A marker moved quietly. A line crossed just enough to see if anyone notices. And when nobody pushes back, it keeps going. By the time the last piece was cleared, the hillside looked off. Not ruined exactly, but interrupted, like a sentence that got cut off halfway through. The design didn't make sense anymore. The layout was broken, the symmetry gone. A few weeks after that, I heard the buyer backed out. Didn't surprise me. Then came word that the surveyor they'd hired, the one who supposedly updated the boundary, had his license suspended pending investigation. There were discrepancies in his reports, inconsistencies that didn't line up with any recorded data. As for Daniel, fines, penalties, delays, nothing catastrophic maybe, but enough to leave a mark. And me? I went back to walking that ridge. Same limestone, same creek, same quiet. The original markers, right where they've always been. Sometimes I stop at that 6-foot stretch, not because it's special, but because it reminds me how easy it is for people to test limits when they think no one's paying attention, and how quickly things change when someone does. Now here's the part one still think about. If I hadn't walked that line that day, if I hadn't checked, if I'd just assumed everything was fine like it had been for years, would they have gotten away with it? Would that patio still be there? Would that line have quietly shifted forever? I don't know. But I do know this, it wasn't really about land. It was about where you decide to draw your line, and whether you're willing to defend it when someone steps over. So I'm curious what you think. Was I right to push it all the way, to force the teardown, to refuse the deal? Or should I have taken the money, let it go, and saved everyone the trouble? Let me know in the comments, because depending on who you ask, this story ends very differently.